Station Keras was always busy. Aliens from every corner of the galaxy walked through its corridors, speaking in hundreds of different languages, trading goods, sharing stories, living their lives. It was the kind of place where nobody really stood out because everyone was different. That's what made it perfect for hiding secrets. The day everything changed started like any other. The station's alarms went off in the middle of the night shift. A distress beacon. Chief of Security Ryan grabbed his gear and headed to the docking bay with his team. They found a small transport ship drifting in space, torn apart by weapons fire. Pirates? Probably. The ship was a graveyard. Bodies everywhere. Crew members who'd fought back and lost. But then Ryan heard something. A sound that didn't belong among all that death. Crying. A baby's cry. He found the infant tucked into an emergency pod in the cargo hold. Someone had hidden the child there before they died, hoping someone would find him. The baby looked human, maybe a few months old, wrapped in a blanket that was now stained with soot and blood. But it was the eyes that made Ryan stop cold. They weren't brown or blue or green like normal human eyes. They were gold. Pure, brilliant gold, like someone had poured liquid sunshine into them. Ryan had seen a lot of strange things in his 20 years working station security. The galaxy was full of weird mutations and genetic modifications. But something about those eyes felt different. Important. Maybe even dangerous. He brought the baby back to the station. There was no ID on the ship, no records, nothing to tell them who the child was or where he came from. The pirates had made sure of that. It was like the universe had dropped this kid into their laps with no instructions and no explanation. Beth worked as one of the station's administrators. She was human, originally from Earth, and she'd been living on Keras for almost 15 years. When she saw the orphaned baby, something in her heart just broke open. She'd never had kids of her own. Life in space made that complicated. But looking at this tiny human child with those impossible golden eyes, she knew she couldn't let him go into the system. She filled out the paperwork and took him home that same day. She named him Daniel. It was her father's name. The council sent their doctors to check him out within a week. They ran all their scans and tests, poked and prodded the poor kid for hours. When they were done, they filed their report. Healthy human male, unusual eye pigmentation likely due to harmless genetic mutation. Case closed. The doctors didn't care much. Humans were common in council space. Nothing special about them. Just another species that had figured out space travel a few hundred years ago. Beth raised Daniel in her small apartment on the station's residential level. He was a quiet baby, hardly ever cried. As he grew into a toddler, she started noticing things. Little things at first. He walked at 8 months. Started talking in full sentences before his 2nd birthday. By the time he was 3, he could read. Not just kids' books either. Real books. Technical manuals. Station regulations. Anything he could get his hands on. When Daniel turned 5, Beth enrolled him in the station's mixed-species school. Most human kids struggled there at first. Learning alongside alien children who thought differently, communicated differently, sometimes didn't even breathe the same air. But Daniel thrived. Within months, he was fluent in the clicking language the insect-like Trell used. Then he picked up the musical tones the harmony spoke in. By age 7, he could hold conversations in 6 different languages, switching between them like it was nothing. Teachers loved him. Other kids thought he was weird but interesting. Beth started to worry. Smart was good, but too smart drew attention. And attention was dangerous when you were human living in a galaxy where humans weren't exactly at the top of the food chain. The really strange things started happening when Daniel turned 9. He'd wake up in the middle of the night and tell Beth that the air recycler in Section 7 was about to break down. She'd laugh it off, but then the next day, maintenance would report a malfunction in Section 7's air system. He'd mentioned that Mr. Harrison from the market would be closed tomorrow because of a family emergency. Sure enough, the store would be shuttered the next morning. At first, Beth thought maybe he was just really observant. Kids notice things adults miss. But it kept happening. Over and over. He knew things before they happened. Not big dramatic things. Just small details. The kind of stuff that made you wonder if he was reading the future somehow. And then there was the fact that Daniel never got sick. Not once in 10 years. Every other kid on the station caught the flu or picked up some weird alien virus from school. Daniel? Never even sneezed. Beth took him to the doctor once just to make sure everything was okay. The doctor ran some tests, shrugged, and said the kid just had a really good immune system. Lucky genetics. But Beth knew better. Those golden eyes weren't just pretty. They meant something. She'd catch Daniel staring off into space sometimes, his eyes almost glowing in certain lights, and she'd wonder what he was really seeing. What he knew that he wasn't telling her. She kept her mouth shut though. Didn't ask too many questions. Didn't push for answers. Because deep down, Beth understood something important about the galaxy they lived in. Being human and ordinary was safe. Being human and special? That was how you disappeared. The other kids eventually stopped thinking Daniel was weird and started thinking he was just Daniel. That quiet human kid with the gold eyes who was good at everything but never showed off about it. He had friends. Not a ton, but enough. A Trell girl named Click 21 who thought his language skills were impressive. A Harmony boy who taught him how to sing in musical frequencies humans couldn't normally hear. A human girl named Rachel whose parents ran a restaurant on the lower levels. Daniel's life was normal. As normal as life could be for an orphan with mysterious golden eyes living on an alien space station. He went to school, did his homework, helped Beth around the apartment, played games with his friends. Just a regular kid growing up in an irregular place. But when Daniel turned 12, everything changed. The council had a policy of running genetic surveys on all station residents every few years. Just routine checks to track population genetics, watch for diseases, that kind of thing. A council inspector named Victor came through Keras to handle the surveys that cycle. Victor was bored. He'd been doing these surveys for 30 years, scanning the same species over and over, filing the same reports. Nothing ever surprised him anymore. Until he scanned Daniel. The scanner made a sound Victor had never heard before. A high-pitched shriek, almost like an alarm. The display screen flashed red with an error message in ancient council script. Victor had to look up the translation because the language was so old. What it said made his blood run cold. Primarch classification, extinct bloodline verification required. Victor's hands shook as he read those words again. And again. Primarch was a designation that hadn't been used in thousands of years. It meant royalty, leadership, power. An extinct bloodline? There was only one bloodline in recorded history that had been classified as both primarch and extinct. The Soulborn. Victor filed his report immediately, flagging it as urgent. Deep in the council's central archives, automated systems that hadn't activated in 8,000 years suddenly came online. Alerts went out to departments that most modern council members didn't even know existed. Ancient protocols began running their ancient programs. And Beth, holding Daniel close that night while he slept, had no idea that their quiet life on Station Keras was about to end forever. The alert pinged on Dr. Phillips' computer at 3 a.m. He was the council's head historian, responsible for maintaining records that went back tens of thousands of years. Most of his job involved reading dry reports and cataloging old data that nobody cared about anymore. Exciting stuff. He almost deleted the notification. Probably just another system glitch. The archives were ancient, always throwing random errors. But something made him click on it instead. Maybe curiosity. Maybe faith. The message was short. Just a few words that didn't make any sense. Primarch classification alert, Soulborn Dynasty protocol activated. Philip stared at his screen. Soulborn Dynasty. He knew that name. Every historian knew it, the way every child knows about ghost stories. It was legend. Myth. The kind of thing that probably never really happened but made for good stories anyway. But the system didn't flag myths. It flagged real genetic markers. Real bloodlines. Philip didn't sleep that night. Or the next night. Or the night after that. He dove into archives that hadn't been opened in centuries, reading documents so old they were written in languages that barely existed anymore. And slowly, piece by piece, the real story started to come together. 8,000 years ago, humanity hadn't been the scattered, ordinary species it was now. They'd been something else entirely. Something incredible. They called themselves the Soulborn Dynasty, and they'd ruled over a third of the galaxy. Not through war or conquest, but through sheer brilliance. They were humans who'd changed themselves, modified their own genetics until they became almost superhuman. The Soulborn all had golden eyes. It was their mark, their signature, the sign of the genetic changes they'd made to themselves. But it wasn't just cosmetic. Those golden eyes came with gifts that seemed impossible. They could see the future, not clearly, but in flashes and fragments. They had perfect memory, remembering everything they'd ever seen or learned. Their minds could interface directly with technology, controlling machines just by thinking. And they lived for hundreds of years, aging so slowly they might as well have been immortal. They'd built wonders. Cities that floated in space. Ships that could cross the galaxy in days. Technology so advanced that modern council scientists still couldn't figure out how half of it worked. The Soulborn had been like gods walking among mortals. And then, one night 8,000 years ago, they all vanished. Every single one. No battles, no disasters, no explanation. They just disappeared, leaving behind their empty cities and their incredible machines and absolutely no clue where they'd gone or why. Within a few generations, humanity had forgotten they'd ever existed. The Soulborn became myths. Legends. Stories that people stopped believing in. But Philip was looking at proof that they'd been real. And more than that, he was looking at proof that one of them still existed. A 12-year-old boy named Daniel living on Station Keras. Philip sent urgent messages to the Council's leadership. This was huge. This changed everything humanity thought they knew about their own history. But before anyone could respond, things on Station Keras started going very wrong. Daniel woke up screaming. Beth ran into his room to find him sitting up in bed, his golden eyes glowing so brightly they lit up the dark room. Tears were streaming down his face. The reactor, he gasped. Section 12. It's going to explode. 20 minutes. Maybe less. Beth had learned to trust Daniel's instincts over the years, but this was different. This wasn't a hunch or a feeling. He was absolutely certain. And he was terrified. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed her communicator and called station security, called maintenance, called everyone she could think of. Most people thought she was crazy, but enough believed her that they started evacuating Section 12 anyway. Just in case. 17 minutes later, the reactor exploded. The blast was contained, barely, but it would have killed everyone in 3 sections if they hadn't evacuated. Beth held Daniel tight while the station shook around them, and she felt him trembling against her. I saw them die, Daniel whispered. I saw all of them. I knew exactly what would happen. That was when Beth realized Daniel's abilities weren't just getting stronger. They were waking up. The visions kept coming after that. Daniel would be sitting in class and suddenly freeze, his eyes glowing, seeing something no one else could see. He saw ships approaching the station. Military vessels with no identification markers, no council authorization codes. He saw armed soldiers storming through the corridors. He saw them demanding one thing, the boy with golden eyes. He told Beth everything. She wanted to run, to take Daniel and disappear into some corner of the galaxy where no one would find them. But there was nowhere to run. The ships were already coming. They arrived 3 days later. 6 vessels, heavily armed, surrounding the station. Their message was simple and terrifying. Surrender the boy or they'd start destroying sections of the station. 1 section every hour until they got what they wanted. Ryan, the security chief who'd found Daniel all those years ago, refused. This was his station. These were his people. He wasn't handing over a kid to armed thugs, no matter what threats they made. The council sent reinforcements, but they were hours away. The station was on its own. The attacking ships opened fire. Their weapons tore through Keras's shields like they were paper. Explosions ripped through the outer sections. People died. Station Keras, which had been a peaceful home to thousands of beings from hundreds of species, became a war zone in minutes. And something inside Daniel broke. He was standing in the security center with Beth and Ryan when it happened. His eyes didn't just glow anymore. They blazed, burning with golden light so bright it hurt to look at. Daniel screamed, but it wasn't a scream of pain. It was a scream of awakening. Memories crashed into his mind like a tidal wave. Not his memories. Other people's memories. His parents, his grandparents, ancestors stretching back through centuries and millennia. He saw their lives, felt their thoughts, knew everything they'd known. Thousands of lifetimes of knowledge and experience pouring into him all at once. He saw the Soulborn Empire at its height. Saw the golden-eyed humans who'd reshaped themselves into something more. Saw the wonders they'd built and the choices they'd made. He understood now what he was. What he'd always been. And he understood what he could do. Daniel reached out with his mind. It felt natural, like using a muscle he'd always had but never knew existed. He touched the station's computer systems, and they responded to him instantly. Defense grids, weapons arrays, shield generators, all of it becoming extensions of his own consciousness. The attacking ships fired another volley. Daniel stopped the weapons in mid-flight. Just froze them in space like someone hitting a pause button. Then he reached further, his mind extending out into the vacuum, touching the attacking vessels themselves. Their systems were sophisticated, protected by multiple layers of security. It didn't matter. Daniel slipped through their defenses like they weren't there. He didn't destroy the ships. He just stopped them. Shut down their weapons, their engines, their life support systems all at once. 6 military vessels reduced to helpless metal boxes drifting in space. The whole thing took less than 30 seconds. Ryan stared at Daniel with his mouth open. Beth held onto a console to keep from falling down. Around the security center, every screen showed the same impossible thing. 6 enemy ships, completely disabled, not a shot fired. Daniel blinked and the golden glow faded from his eyes. He looked exhausted. Confused. Scared. "What did I just do?" he whispered. Before anyone could answer, new ships dropped out of hyperspace. Council military, finally arriving. Their commander was Admiral Helen, a decorated officer with 40 years of experience. She'd fought in 3 wars and thought she'd seen everything. But she'd never seen anything like this. Her scanners showed the disabled ships. Showed the station's defenses somehow still intact despite the attack. And showed one human boy at the center of it all, his genetic signature lighting up her screens like a supernova. Helen had studied ancient history at the academy. She knew the old legends better than most. And looking at her scanner readouts, she knew exactly what she was seeing. The Soulborn weren't extinct. They'd just been sleeping. And now one of them had finally woken up. She sent a priority message directly to the Grand Council's emergency line. 5 words that would change the galaxy forever. The Golden-Eyed have returned. The Grand Council chamber was enormous, built to hold representatives from every species that had achieved space travel. Normally it was a place of careful diplomacy, polite debates, and boring procedural votes. Today it was absolute chaos. 200 different species, all shouting at once. Some in languages that couldn't even be translated properly. The chamber's translation systems were overloading trying to keep up. Delegates were on their feet, pointing fingers, making accusations. A few were calling for war. Others were demanding answers. Many were just panicking. And in the center of it all stood Daniel. 12 years old, barely 5 feet tall, wearing the same clothes he'd been wearing when they'd pulled him off Station Keras 3 days ago. His golden eyes swept across the chamber, taking in the fear and anger directed at him from every direction. Beth stood beside him, one hand on his shoulder. They tried to separate them when they arrived. Beth had made it very clear that wasn't happening. Where Daniel went, she went. End of discussion. Chancellor Victor banged his gavel for order. He was the council's elected leader, a position that usually meant giving speeches and signing documents. He'd never had to deal with anything like this. Nobody had. Not in thousands of years. "Please," Victor shouted over the noise. "Please, we must have order." It took 10 minutes to get everyone quiet enough to actually speak. Even then, the tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. A delegate from the Krell Empire stood up. The Krell were one of the oldest and most powerful species in council space. They'd been exploring the stars for over 6,000 years. They didn't like surprises. "The question is simple," the Krell delegate said, his voice cold. "How many more of these Soulborn exist? How many humans are walking around with this power just waiting to activate? For all we know, there could be thousands. Millions." The chamber erupted again. Every species had humans living among them. Human workers, human traders, human neighbors. The thought that any of them might secretly be part of this ancient superpowered bloodline terrified them. Daniel raised his hand like he was back in school asking to speak. It was such a normal, innocent gesture that the whole chamber fell silent just from the strangeness of it. "May I explain?" Daniel asked quietly. Chancellor Victor nodded, though he looked like he wanted to be anywhere else but there. "Please." Daniel took a deep breath. The inherited memories were still settling in his mind, thousands of years of history trying to fit inside a 12-year-old's head. It was overwhelming. But he understood enough now to give them answers. "The Soulborn didn't disappear," Daniel began. "They scattered. On purpose. They broke themselves apart and spread across all of humanity. It was their choice." He paused, trying to find the right words. How do you explain something that happened 8,000 years ago? Something that even he was still trying to understand? "They saw something coming," Daniel continued. "Something terrible, still far away but inevitable. They knew that if they stayed together, stayed as an empire, they couldn't stop it. They weren't strong enough. So they made a different choice." "What choice?" someone shouted from the crowd. "To wait," Daniel said. "They diluted their bloodline intentionally. Mixed it into humanity so thoroughly that it would almost disappear. Just tiny fragments scattered across billions of normal humans. They knew that eventually, when the time was right, a few of those fragments would come together again. A few people would carry enough of the bloodline to awaken. But just a few. Not an army. Not an empire. How few? The Krell delegate demanded. Daniel closed his eyes, searching through the inherited knowledge. Maybe 10. Maybe 20. Across the entire human population, which is what? 40 billion? 50 billion? We're not an invasion force. We're not trying to take over. We're barely even real. A delegate from the Harmonious Collective stood up. Her species was known for being logical and calm. But you disabled 6 military vessels in seconds. One child did that. What could 20 of you do? I don't know, Daniel admitted. I'm still figuring out what I can do. But I know why the Soulborn scattered. They saw that unity wasn't about domination. It was about cooperation. They weren't trying to rule the galaxy. They were trying to save it. From what? Chancellor Victor asked. Daniel's eyes glowed golden for just a moment. From what's coming? That started another round of shouting. Claims that Daniel was trying to manipulate them. That this was all some elaborate human plot. That they should lock him up, study him, maybe even eliminate him before he became too dangerous. But underneath all the anger, there was something else. Fear. Because the Council had built their entire civilization on one basic assumption, that they were at the top. That they represented the peak of galactic advancement. That they were as good as it got. Now they were learning that humans had already been where they were trying to go. And not just been there, but gone far beyond it. 8,000 years ago, while most Council species were still learning to make fire, humans had been bending space-time and modifying their own genetics and building an empire that spanned a third of the galaxy. It was humiliating. It was terrifying. It shattered everything they thought they knew about their place in the universe. A human delegate stood up. His name was Jack Chen, and he represented Earth's government on the Council. He looked as shocked as everyone else. Earth had no records of the Soulborn. Human history only went back a few thousand years with any reliability. They'd had no idea. If what this boy says is true, Jack said carefully, then humanity itself didn't know. We're just as surprised as you are. We're not hiding anything. We're not planning anything. We're just ordinary people who happen to share some DNA with an ancient empire we never knew existed. Ordinary? The Krell delegate laughed bitterly. You're telling us that any human anywhere might suddenly wake up with godlike powers and you want us to believe you're ordinary? Yes, Daniel said firmly. Because we are. I'm ordinary. I was raised by a single mom on a space station. I went to school. I have friends. I like pizza and bad movies and staying up too late reading. The only thing that makes me different is genetics I didn't ask for and didn't know I had until a week ago. He looked around the chamber, meeting as many eyes as he could. Some were hostile. Some were scared. A few looked almost sympathetic. The Soulborn weren't monsters, Daniel continued. They were people who tried to do something good and made hard choices to make it happen. They gave up their empire. They gave up their power. They scattered themselves because they believed the galaxy needed time to grow on its own, to develop, to become ready for what was coming. And what is coming? Someone shouted. Daniel's eyes began to glow again, that golden light filling them until they looked like miniature suns. His voice changed, became deeper, layered with echoes of thousands of other voices. The harvesters, he said. They arrive every 20,000 years. They've been doing it for millions of years, across dozens of galaxies. They find civilizations that have reached a certain level of advancement and they harvest them. Take everything. Technology, knowledge, resources, even the people themselves. And they're coming here. Soon. The chamber went dead silent. Every species had legends about the harvesters. Ancient warnings passed down through their histories. But most had dismissed them as myths. Scary stories to tell children. The Soulborn saw them coming 8,000 years ago, Daniel continued, his voice still carrying that strange echo. They calculated. They planned. And they realized that one empire, no matter how powerful, couldn't stop the harvesters. But many different civilizations, working together, each bringing their own unique strengths? That might be enough. The glow faded from his eyes and Daniel swayed on his feet. Beth caught him before he fell. He looked exhausted, like he'd just run a marathon. Chancellor Victor stared at Daniel for a long moment. Then he looked at his advisors, at the delegates, at the faces of 200 different species all struggling to process what they just heard. We need proof, Victor said finally. Check your long-range sensors, Daniel said quietly. The edge of the galaxy. You'll find it. The Council's Science Division ran the scans. It took 3 hours. When the results came back, the chamber emptied of voices. Because there, at the very edge of council space, their sensors had picked up something massive. Something that shouldn't be there. Thousands of objects, too big to be natural, moving in perfect formation. Moving toward them. The harvesters weren't a myth. They were real. And they were already here. The council fell apart within days. It wasn't a dramatic collapse with declarations and ceremonies. It was quieter than that. More pathetic. Species just stopped showing up to meetings. They went home to prepare for whatever they thought was coming. Some decided to fight. The warrior species, the ones with proud military traditions, started mobilizing their fleets. They talked big about honor and courage and not going down without a battle. Others started packing. Entire civilizations began preparing colony ships to flee to distant galaxies, hoping they could outrun what was coming. And many, maybe most, simply denied it was happening at all. They called the sensor readings a mistake. Called Daniel a liar or a lunatic. It was easier to pretend nothing was wrong than to face the truth. Admiral Helen watched it all unfold with growing frustration. She was a military officer, a strategist. She'd spent her whole career planning for threats and building defenses. And now, facing the biggest threat in galactic history, everyone was just falling apart. But Helen had also studied the old records. She'd read Philip's research on the Soulborn. And she understood something that most of the council didn't want to accept. If Daniel was right, if the Soulborn had planned for this 8,000 years ago, then running and hiding wasn't the answer. Neither was fighting alone. She went to Daniel with a proposal. He was still on the council station, essentially under protective custody, though nobody wanted to admit they were holding a 12-year-old prisoner. Beth was with him constantly, and Philip had barely left their side either, too fascinated by the living piece of history standing in front of him. You said there are others, Helen told Daniel. Other Soulborn descendants who can awaken. We need to find them. Daniel nodded slowly. The inherited memories were clearer now, settling into something he could actually use instead of just overwhelming him. I can feel them. Not exactly where they are, but sort of. Like a compass pointing in different directions. Then we go find them, Helen said simply. Before the harvesters arrive. Before it's too late. The council leadership tried to stop them. Too dangerous. Too uncertain. What if Daniel was leading them into a trap? What if the other Soulborn were hostile? What if? Helen ignored them all. She commandeered a fast scout ship, gathered a small crew of people she trusted, and they left within 12 hours. Beth came, obviously. She wasn't letting Daniel out of her sight. Philip came because he couldn't resist the chance to meet more living Soulborn. Ryan insisted on coming too, claiming someone needed to keep everyone safe. A few others joined them. Volunteers who believed what Daniel was saying and wanted to help. Their first stop was a mining colony on the edge of council space. Rough place. The kind of world where people went when they were running from something or looking to disappear. Daniel led them to a residential complex that looked like it might collapse if you sneezed too hard. They found him in a bar. His name was Kyle, and he was a mining engineer. Mid-30s, covered in old scars and new bruises, with eyes that same impossible shade of gold. He'd been hiding them behind colored contacts for most of his life. People asked fewer questions that way. I knew someone would come eventually, Kyle said when they explained why they were there. He didn't sound surprised. Just tired. I've been having the dreams for weeks. Memories that aren't mine. Voices in my head speaking languages I shouldn't know. When Daniel touched his hand, something clicked. Kyle gasped as the awakening hit him. Not as intense as Daniel's had been, but still overwhelming. His eyes blazed gold and for a moment, just a moment, everyone in the bar could feel the power radiating from him. Kyle's gift was different from Daniel's. Where Daniel could interface with technology and see possible futures, Kyle could sense the fundamental structure of matter itself. He looked at the wall and understood exactly how the molecules were arranged, what would make it stronger or weaker, how to reshape it with his mind if he wanted to. They found the next one on a merchant vessel traveling between trading hubs. Her name was Nina, captain of a small cargo ship. She'd been smuggling goods on the side to make ends meet. When they showed up asking about her golden eyes, she pulled a weapon first and asked questions later. Smart woman. Nina's awakening brought something else. She could feel the emotions and intentions of people around her. Not quite mind reading, but close. Empathy turned up to impossible levels. She could walk into a room and immediately know who was lying, who was afraid, who could be trusted. It made her dizzy at first, all those feelings crashing into her at once. This is what the Soulborn were, Philip breathed, watching Nina and Kyle work together. Not just powerful individuals. They were designed to complement each other. Different abilities that worked together. They found a soldier named Eric on a council military base. He'd been hiding his golden eyes for 15 years, wearing colored lenses during inspections. His gift, once awakened, was perfect combat awareness. He could see every angle of a fight before it happened, predict every move an opponent would make. Not the future like Daniel saw it, but tactics and strategy taken to an impossible level. Then there was Rachel, a scientist working on an isolated research station. She'd been studying quantum mechanics and making breakthroughs that her colleagues couldn't explain. After awakening, they understood why. She could literally see quantum fields, watch particles existing in multiple states at once. Physics wasn't theoretical to her anymore. It was visual. Tangible. Each awakening followed the same pattern. Daniel would sense them, they'd find them, and the moment of contact would trigger the inherited memories. Each person's abilities were unique but complementary. It was like watching pieces of a puzzle coming together. But it wasn't easy. Some of the soul-born descendants didn't want to be found. They'd spent their whole lives hiding, trying to be normal. The idea of accepting this legacy, this responsibility, terrified them. A few refused outright. They wanted nothing to do with ancient empires or approaching threats. They just wanted to live their lives. Daniel didn't force them. The soulborn had been about choice, he explained. About freedom. If someone wanted to walk away, that was their right. Over 3 months, they found 11 people total. 11 humans scattered across dozens of colonies and stations, all carrying fragments of the soulborn bloodline. Some were young like Daniel. Others were older. Kyle was the oldest at 47. The youngest was a girl named Amy, just 10 years old, who'd been having nightmares about golden cities and ancient voices. As they gathered, something remarkable happened. They started to synchronize. Not in a creepy hive mind way. They were still individuals with their own thoughts and personalities. But they could feel each other now. Share information instantly. Work together with perfect coordination because they understood each other on a level that went beyond words. And they brought something to the council that nobody expected. Not superweapons. Not some ancient doomsday device the soulborn had left behind. They brought knowledge. The soulborn had spent thousands of years studying something that the council had never really understood, how to make different species truly work together. Not just coexist. Not just tolerate each other. Actually unify into something stronger than any of them could be alone. It was a science. A real, rigorous field of study with principles and methods. The soulborn had analyzed thousands of different species, figured out their strengths and weaknesses, understood how to coordinate them so that each one's advantages covered another's disadvantages. Rachel could look at a council fleet formation and immediately see the inefficiencies. Eric could design battle tactics that used each species' military strengths perfectly. Nina could sense the emotional barriers keeping species apart and find ways to bridge them. Kyle understood the resource and logistical chains needed to support a truly integrated force. And Daniel, standing in the center of it all, could see the possible futures. See what would work and what would fail. See the path forward through the chaos. They didn't tell the council they were coming back. They just showed up one day, all 11 of them walking into the council chamber together. Their golden eyes glowing faintly in the light. Chancellor Victor looked at them with exhaustion and hope fighting for control of his expression. "Can you stop them?" he asked quietly. "Can you stop the harvesters?" Daniel shook his head. "No. We're not warriors. We're not conquerors. We can't save you." The hope died in Victor's eyes. "But," Nina continued, stepping forward, "we can teach you how to save yourselves." The harvesters arrived on a Tuesday. Not that the day of the week mattered when your entire civilization was about to be tested, but Daniel would always remember that detail. Tuesday morning, Galactic Standard Time, when the sensors finally got a clear reading on what was coming. The fleet was massive. Thousands of ships, each one bigger than anything the Council had ever built. They moved in perfect formation, like a school of fish, but made of metal and death. Their technology was so advanced that Council scientists couldn't even figure out what half of it did. They'd been doing this for millions of years, perfecting their methods across dozens of galaxies. The Council's combined fleet looked pathetic in comparison. Every species had contributed what they could, but it was a mess. Different ship designs, different weapon systems, different communication protocols. They'd never fought together before. Most of them had barely even worked together on anything. The first battle was a disaster. The harvesters hit them in the outer reach systems, 3-star systems that marked the edge of Council space. The Council fleet tried to mount a defense. It fell apart in minutes. The harvesters' weapons punched through shields like they weren't there. Their tactics were flawless, exploiting every weakness, every gap in coordination. 1,700 ships destroyed in the first hour. Tens of thousands of lives lost. 3 entire colonies wiped out before anyone could evacuate. The Council fleet retreated in chaos. Some species blamed others for the failure. Old rivalries surfaced even in the middle of the crisis. It was everything Daniel had feared. Everything the Soulborn had known would happen if the galaxy wasn't ready. But the 11 Soulborn descendants had spent 3 months preparing for this. They'd worked with every species military command, teaching them the coordination techniques their ancestors had developed. They'd redesigned fleet formations, created new communication systems, showed them how to fight as one force instead of 200 separate armies. The second battle was different. Daniel stood on the bridge of the Council's flagship, a massive warship called Unity. Ironic name, considering. The bridge was crowded with representatives from 30 different species, all working at stations designed for their specific needs. Admiral Helen commanded the fleet, but the 11 Soulborn were there too, scattered throughout the command structure. Daniel's eyes glowed gold as he watched the tactical display. He could see the harvesters moving into position for their next attack. But more than that, he could see the possibilities. 1,000 different futures branching out from this moment. Most of them ended in defeat. But some, just a few, showed a path to victory. "They're going to hit us from 3 directions," Daniel said quietly. His voice carried through the bridge's communication system. "They'll expect us to split our forces. We can't do that. We need to concentrate everything on their center formation." "That leaves our flanks exposed," a military commander objected. He was from the Krell Empire, one of the species that prided itself on tactical brilliance. "I know," Daniel said. "That's why the Velosian ships need to move to rapid response positions. Their engines are faster. They can cover the flanks after we break the center." Nina stood at another console, her empathic abilities letting her feel the doubt and fear rippling through the command staff. "Trust this," she said calmly. "We've run this scenario 1,000 times. It works." Eric was coordinating with the fighter squadrons, his combat awareness helping them understand attack patterns they couldn't see on their own. Rachel was working with the science teams, using her quantum perception to predict the harvesters' weapon frequencies. Kyle was managing the supply lines, making sure ammunition and power cells got where they needed to be. The harvesters attacked. The Council fleet moved as one, executing the plan perfectly. When the harvesters tried to flank them, the Velosian ships were already there, their superior speed letting them respond in seconds. When the harvesters adapted their tactics, Daniel saw it coming and adjusted before they could exploit it. For the first time, the harvesters faced something they'd never encountered before. Not a single species fighting desperately for survival. Not even an alliance of species sort of working together. But a true unified force where every civilization's strengths covered another's weaknesses. The battle raged for 18 hours. The Council lost ships. Lots of them. But they held. And more importantly, they damaged the harvesters. Broke their formations. Forced them to retreat and regroup. It wasn't a victory. Not really. But it wasn't a massacre either. It was a start. Over the next 3 months, the war continued. The harvesters kept coming, wave after wave, adapting to the Council's tactics. But the Council adapted too, learning, growing, getting better at fighting together. And Daniel felt the temptation growing stronger every day. He could feel the power inside him, the full extent of what the Soulborn had been capable of. He could take control of every ship in the fleet with his mind. Force them to obey his commands. Remove all the hesitation, all the doubt, all the friction that came from coordinating so many different species. He could make them perfect. It would be easy. So easy. Just reach out with his consciousness and dominate them. For their own good. To save them. The other Soulborn felt his struggle through their connection. Kyle, wrestling with similar thoughts while managing fleet logistics. Nina, feeling everyone's fear and wanting to just make them stop being afraid. Rachel, seeing quantum possibilities where she could reshape matter itself and wondering why she shouldn't use it. They'd all felt it. The seduction of power. The terrible logic that said forcing people to work together was justified if it saved their lives. The final confrontation came in the Terminus system, where the harvesters made their main push toward Council core worlds. Everything came down to this one battle. The Council had gathered every ship, every weapon, every warrior they had left. The harvesters brought their full force too. Daniel stood on Unity's bridge, his eyes blazing gold, seeing futures splitting and merging and splitting again. In most of them, the council lost. The harvesters won. Civilizations were harvested. Billions died. But in a few futures, a handful of possibilities, there was victory. If the council fleet executed perfectly. If every species trusted each other completely. If they fought not as separate civilizations but as one people. Daniel could make that happen. Could force that perfect unity through sheer will. His hand moved toward the control console. He felt his consciousness expanding, reaching out toward the thousands of ships around them. No, he said quietly. The word hung in the air. His hand stopped moving. Kyle, managing resources 3 decks below, felt the decision through their connection and nodded to himself. Nina, coordinating with the diplomatic teams, smiled with relief. Eric stopped in the middle of briefing a squadron and understood. Rachel paused her calculations. Amy, the youngest, monitoring communications, felt tears on her cheeks without knowing why. All 11 of them felt it. The choice their ancestors had made 8,000 years ago, playing out again in this moment. I can't force them, Daniel said, louder now. Admiral Helen looked at him, understanding dawning in her eyes. The Soulborn could have ruled the galaxy forever. They had the power. But they chose not to. Because unity that's forced isn't real. It's just slavery wearing a prettier mask. He pulled his hand back from the console. Let go of the power he'd been gathering. His eyes dimmed from blazing gold to their normal shade. We can't save them by taking away their choice, Daniel continued. We can only teach them. Show them. Trust them to choose for themselves. What if they choose wrong? Helen asked quietly. Then we lose together, Daniel said. As free people. Not as puppets dancing on Soulborn strings. The other awakened Soulborn stopped trying to control things. Stopped forcing perfection. Instead, they just advised. Suggested. Trusted the council species to make their own decisions, even if those decisions were slower, messier, less perfect than the Soulborn could have imposed. And something remarkable happened. The council fleet fought like they'd never fought before. Not because they were being controlled. But because they chose to trust each other. Chose to believe in the coordination they'd learned. Chose unity over fear. The battle was brutal. The council lost ships by the hundreds. But they adapted on the fly, learning from their mistakes, covering for each other without being told. Species that had been rivals for centuries fought side by side. Commanders who'd never trusted aliens with their lives put their fleets under foreign tactical control because they'd learned it worked. It wasn't perfect. People made mistakes. Plans fell apart. Things went wrong. But they kept fighting. Together. The harvesters had faced thousands of civilizations before. Conquered them all with perfect tactics and overwhelming force. But they'd never faced something like this. A force that grew stronger through diversity instead of weaker. That adapted through cooperation instead of breaking apart. When the harvesters finally retreated, pulling back into dark space to regroup, the council fleet was battered and exhausted. Half their ships were gone. Entire species had lost most of their military forces. But they'd won. Not perfectly. Not without terrible cost. But they'd won. And they'd done it themselves. Daniel collapsed in his chair as the adrenaline faded. Beth was there immediately, holding him while he shook with exhaustion. Admiral Helen looked at the tactical display, at the retreating harvester fleet, at the damaged but victorious council ships, and felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. They'll come back, she said. Yes, Daniel agreed. In a few years, maybe sooner. But next time we'll be ready. And not because we've got Soulborn controlling everything. Because the galaxy learned how to stand together. The war wasn't over. The harvesters would return. But something had changed. The council had proven they could unify when it mattered. Not through domination. Through choice. Daniel returned to Station Keras a few months later. The station had been rebuilt after the early attacks. Beth went back to her administrative job. Daniel enrolled in school again, sitting in classes with the same friends he'd had before. His eyes were still golden. Everyone knew what he was now. But he was just Daniel. The kid who was really good at math and terrible at sports and liked to read science fiction novels. The other Soulborn scattered too. Kyle went back to mining. Nina to her merchant ship. Eric stayed in the military, but as an advisor, not a commander. Rachel continued her research. Amy started attending a normal school, making friends, being a kid. They'd saved the galaxy not by being gods, but by refusing to be gods. By choosing to trust in ordinary people to do extraordinary things. One evening, Beth found Daniel on their apartment balcony, staring at the stars. "Do you think they'll come back?" she asked. "The harvesters?" "Eventually. But we'll be ready." "And the Soulborn? Will more of you awaken?" Daniel shrugged. "Maybe. If they're needed. But I hope not. I hope the galaxy can handle what comes next on their own." He smiled, and for a moment his eyes glowed just slightly in the starlight. That's what the Soulborn wanted all along. Not to rule. Just to help the galaxy learn to rule itself. Beth put her arm around him. "Your ancestors would be proud." "I hope so," Daniel said quietly. "Because they gave up everything for this. And I almost threw it all away because I thought I knew better." "But you didn't," Beth reminded him. "You chose trust over power. That's what makes you human, Daniel. Not the golden eyes or the abilities. The choice to let people be free." Daniel nodded, still watching the stars. Somewhere out there, the harvesters were regrouping. Other threats would emerge eventually. The galaxy would face more challenges, more crises. But it would face them together. Not as subjects of the Soulborn. Not as puppets being manipulated by superior beings. As free species who'd learned that their differences made them stronger, not weaker. The orphan with golden eyes had helped save the galaxy. Not by becoming a god. But by refusing to. And that, in the end, was the most human thing he could have done.